And so, okay, so let me go to my next slide. And so why we're all here today, so these updates for the California DREAM Act, as a reminder, as a refresher, is also in line with the FAFSA Simplification Act that was passed during the pandemic that called for updates to that financial aid application to make it an easier process for applicants and their families. And I have been seeing more and more in more and more places that this shows up, that the FAFSA will be released on December 31st at the end of this month. And that means that the California DREAM Act is also expected to be released on that same day. Because of those delay, the priority deadline for this upcoming academic year is actually going to be April 2nd, as folks had already seen. And the community college deadline is still going to be the same. Priority deadline is still going to be the same for September 3rd. And we're going to be just providing some general updates of the application at the moment, since I think we'll really know a lot more once that application has been released. And do want to mention that a lot of the changes do mirror what we're seeing with the FAFSA changes. And it also includes recommendations from this Renewing the Dream report that CSAC did release earlier this year, that talked a little bit about the challenges around the California DREAM Act and some recommendations on how to meet those challenges. And so just as an overview, I think some of the changes to the application that's relative to FAFSA, the California DREAM Act will also be transitioning to using the Student Aid Index, SAI, to replace the EFC, Expected Family Contribution, as one of the calculators to figure out how much aid a student is getting. I think part of this change also is because there's a lot of confusion around the term EFC, and hoping that the SAI term will be a little bit more understandable for families. And in comparison to FAFSA, the California DREAM Act is actually keeping a lot of the same things. So there'll still be the same number of questions, the same language around income for students and parents. And they're also going to keep the same income reporting requirements given the audience that the application serves. And some of the bigger changes that we do expect to see is there will be changes to the parent signature process. So as folks probably know now, in the current application, or in last year's application, parents kind of need to sign the application by providing a parent PIN. So that will be removed completely, actually, and now parents can kind of electronically sign within the application itself. So if they're sitting there completing the application with the student, they can kind of electronically sign right there. Or if they're not present at that moment, they can kind of log back in later with the student's account to sign in. But it'll be removing that whole parent PIN process altogether. This is another hope that it will be an easier process for parents to sign the application altogether. And then the DREAM Act will also now have information about the Dreamer Service Incentive Grant, or DSIG, incorporated within the application itself. This, if folks don't know, is a program that allows Cal Grant B eligible recipients to receive grants for completing a certain number of volunteer service hours during their academic year, so that it kind of provides more opportunities for paid professional development for undocumented students, regardless of whether or not they have work authorization. And so with this update, students will actually be able to opt in to get information about the program within the application, but they will still need to complete kind of a separate DSIG application in order to participate, meet the eligibility requirements, and obviously complete their service hours to get that money. And we can throw some of those links in the chat too if folks are not super familiar with that program. And then I'll pass it over to Nancy to actually talk about one of, I think, the biggest changes in the application that many folks should know about, that all folks should know about.
Thank you, Madeline. It's exciting to just hear you break down some of those changes. I feel like I've been kind of thinking is it the better FAFSA? Is it the newer FAFSA, or better CADAA, new CADAA? but I do see a lot of things that are exciting within the new CADAA. One of those, which is the AB 540 affidavit, will actually be embedded into the California DREAM Act application. Students will answer questions. It will generate a report that will be the same as the information that would be on the affidavit, and that information will be shared with every school that the student lists on their CADAA application. They can list up to 20. So students will still need to talk to the schools to see if there's additional information that's needed. But because it might require, some will just do self-certification and be like, okay, we have the information. Some CCCs will also request documentation, as will the CSU and the UC. So it's an exciting prospect now that students would only have to fill out one application, the DREAM Act application, which will include the AB 540 affidavit. Student can update the affidavit as needed also when necessary, but I also do want to say that it's really important for us as educators to be thinking about how is that process going to work on the back end? How can we make sure that admissions and financial aid are talking more? And how can we make sure that we can help facilitate that process so that students have a clear idea of the information that will be received? And then other updates that we think are important is including race, the inclusion of race, ethnicity, and gender questions. This will be, they're optional questions, and they're not going to be used to determine financial aid eligibility, but it will allow us to do a little bit more benchmarks in terms of students that are able to apply, students that are able to make it through the process, and how can we build initiatives that will help bring up those numbers. Because while it's really exciting that the affidavit is going to be included in the DREAM Act, we still know that less than half of the number of enrolled students, undocumented students in California colleges and universities are actually filling out the DREAM application. So we want to make sure that we are able to do more effective outreach and bring those numbers up. They can opt in for text message communications. And I think that's a great way, since lots of students are not always checking their portal or their email, they can opt in to get a text reminder. And you can now list up to 20 schools.
And so that is just kind of like general ones, right? I think we'll also kind of like know a little bit more how to deal with how to navigate the application once it does actually come out. But not to worry, because this is just one of first of many more, I think, spaces that will be offered in the new year to like help educators learn the most that they can about the California DREAM Act to better guide their students and families. And so we do want folks to kind of stay informed, stay in the know of like what's happening. And some spaces to do that is a lot of what CSAC is offering. If you have not signed up yet for their Better FAFSA Better CADAA Bulletin, you can do so by going to their subscriber page that we'll throw in the chat and just checking off California DREAM Act application and related updates to get those emails. And then I'm really excited for some of CSAC's upcoming statewide financial aid workshops. These are all virtual, but I know they're doing a couple of in-person offerings to, and even in-person Cash for College workshops in the new year, but want to specifically point out that on January 9th, they're going to be doing a California DREAM Act line-by-line review. I'm attending this too, but if you want kind of like a in-depth tour of the application and each of those questions, right? Highly, highly recommend that people sign up for that one. We'll throw those links in the chat too. I think you have to kind of scroll through all of their offerings to find the one for January 9th. And then in late January and early February, there's a couple of other combined FAFSA and CADAA virtual workshops that they're also going to be providing. And then just as a final addition, we are not going to be speaking too much about this today, but we do also know that the new FAFSA is going to be affecting our mixed status families, especially those students who are filling out that application who have undocumented parents, given that everybody now has to have an FSA ID, and a lot of the information for that application will actually be pulled from TransUnion, which can be a challenge, obviously, right, for undocumented families. So we do have this resource here that we'll also throw in the chat that kind of talks about how what to expect for FAFSA with those updates for undocumented families. And we will actually be hosting a national webinar. Nancy will be participating on that on January 24th at 11 a.m. to talk a little bit more about mixed status families and FAFSAs. We don't have the webinar date or the webinar registration for that yet, but please save the date, and then we'll also be sending that information to everybody who registered for today. Nancy, anything you want to add about this piece too? Okay, great.
This is a process that we'll all need to go through together. There's not enough information, but I think all that we can do now is let students know that they're definitely still eligible, that there is a process, and that we're going to be in it together.
Great. Yes, thank you, Nancy. So I'll take a pause there. I know that was a little bits of information, so I'll see if there's any questions, comments, concerns that folks want to raise right now. You can unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I actually saw a couple of comments, so I'll take a minute to also review some of that too. Any questions for anybody, from anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Javier.
Hello. Question about this, but also to see if you guys had any point. So this community colleges are going to go into the ID verify system in a couple days, months, where to have the students, most of the colleges are going to be required to have the students do the ID verify. How would that affect the DREAM Act processes? So if you guys have heard anything about that, especially if a student needs to submit valid California ID or valid identification to receive additional assistance. This was, if you haven't heard about this, this is due to the bots that we're getting so many of the robo students that were enrolling in colleges. So now most of the community colleges are going to go to the ID verify system. And so I just wanted to see if you guys have heard about it and what CSAC or you all are doing to see if we can support it as they fill in out not only the new DREAM Act, but also this other thing.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Javier. Nancy, I'm wondering if you have.
I had not heard of that, Javier, so thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. I think if you could, I did, we have heard more about that there's a sense that there's more fraud, but it also feels like this feels like a little bit of a very far-reaching system for those, few students that may make it through. So if you could send us information, we'd definitely be interested in learning more about that. And if anybody else on the call is already aware of that or has some strategies, we'd love to hear those now.
Cynthia, is it related to that?
Yes, well, first, can Javier repeat? Because I think I was distracted for a minute, but I just want to make sure before I open my mouth and say anything that I understood the question or concern.
So the question was more to see if CADAA or the California Student Aid Commission had mentioned something about how the new way that admissions and records offices are going to be asked to verify if the student is a student, utilizing the ID verify system. And so since we have the new ID verify system processes that are coming through the chancellor's office, and then having the new CADAA, how those two have mentioned, to see if just Immigrants Rising had any information and worked with CSAC to see how those two things are going to kind of clash with each other. Nancy, I believe the same thing, that we're just, we're hoping that we're catching 2-3 students, but in reality, we're going to hurt, 400,000 students. And so I'm just trying to get ahead of it here about it.
Thank you. Cynthia, anything you want to?
No, I had not heard about the ID. I thought it was more so regarding the IRS tax thingy, so I apologize.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on, we'll investigate that a little bit more and most likely share it at a future webinar or share it in our different communications around how CSAC at all is, if they're concerned about that or should be concerned about that, and how any guidance that they have for folks around it. Okay, and then we do have another question around how will, I'm guessing, how will the new California DREAM Act, or how will this impact students applying to transfer and getting financial aid awards in on time before deposits are due? Nancy, anything?
I definitely think that's a challenge, and maybe Catherine, you could chime in on that as well, because they're talking about, if April 2nd is the deadline to submit your application, then there's still all the behind the scenes that individuals need to do in order to be able to have them do their intent to register or their acceptance on May 1st. I haven't heard that they're shifting that deadline for helping students get in, but more that they're encouraging students to apply early. And I think that there's not a specific plan yet, but it could impact students. I think one area would be to be thinking about, can they check on the Cal Grant website to see if they are thinking that it looks like they're going to have a Cal Grant, even if they don't have an award at the school. But Catherine, what else would you or somebody else on the call chime in around that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think luckily the fortunate thing, and this has been the case where my current school at UC Berkeley and prior four-year institutions I've worked at, the transfer acceptance date is typically a whole month later than the new entering students for freshmen. So typically, for example, May 1st tends to be a pretty common deadline for freshman students to have to accept their admissions for a school, while June 1st tends to be a pretty general deadline for transfer students. So it will benefit the transfer students in that they'll get that kind of extra month to be able to see if, depending how the schools are working, if there's some issues. But that's actually a great question. I think I do want to bring back, because luckily I am on a work group for my school that goes over these changes to the FAFSA and the CADAA. So I would like to see how our school would be addressing that. And I'd like to see how other schools might be addressing that. Maybe there might be some schools who push that deadline a little bit further back just to ensure that students are able to have that time. Or maybe there are more deadlines in their financial aid offices there to get the awards out in a timely manner, despite those extensions to that. But again, that's the only thing I can see as far as the benefit, particularly again for transfer students. Now, for these freshman students who are, this is their first time submitting an application, and I think a lot of people have been saying, well, they they haven't seen an application before, so this is all they're used to. But it's still, a lot of changes that we're not sure how are going to be affecting these students. So I'd like to see how schools will be addressing that. But I do want to throw that out there currently at UC Berkeley and prior schools I've worked at, that's typically the case where transfer students do have a little bit extra window. And so hopefully that does give them the ability to get an award and make that decision before they actually, put that admission deposit down.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. And then I think there's also a comment in the chat about private schools that usually having a priority deadline by when they recommend that students submit their application by, so that they can be considered for a financial aid scholarship. So I think a lot of it is just kind of having or communicating with students more, right, to submit early, to submit as soon as they're able to, in order to kind of mitigate some of those expected challenges. But I think for schools also to think on the other side, how flexible some of those deadlines could be, or if there's any movement to kind of, again, prepare for some of the shorter kind of financial aid period that they have. And so I think with that, I got this one final comment on here about an email from UC Admissions saying they recommend students submit by May 2nd to get their financial aid package on time. So it already seems like some schools are kind of pushing the similar deadline just to kind of help again with some of the potential delays that could happen with that April 2nd pushback that we have. But I think with that, if folks do have some other questions, please hold on to it. We're going to be transitioning into our panel, just so we have some time to hear from some really great practitioners that we have for you all today. As mentioned at the front of this event, we did unfortunately have somebody cancel in the beginning because of a last-minute emergency. So we're only going to be hearing from two equally amazing panelists today. So I'll have them come turn on their cameras if they're not already on, and we'll spotlight them. But they introduced themselves earlier today. But we have Virginia Zatarain from Asian Youth Center, who works mostly with high schools at Alhambra Unified School District, and Catherine Custodio, who's already speaking, who is currently a financial aid counselor at UC Berkeley, but has worked all of the systems of higher education at this point, and I know we'll be sharing a little bit more about her experiences at those systems too. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and going to open it up first maybe to Virginia to get us started. But our first question is just kind of what type of support does your organization provide to California Dream Act applicants? And if there's any helpful resources or campus community partnerships that you all have that has been helpful for that too.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Nice to meet you all. As it was mentioned, my name is Virginia, and I'm with the Asian Youth Center. I'm specifically the Youth and Parent Leadership Development Team, and we work in high schools in LAUSD as well as Alhambra. I am at a high school in Northeast LA, and something that we do as an organization is, it's our goal to provide college access support to high school students. That's one of the big components of our Dream Centers. And yeah, so we will put on college access workshops, but we'll also provide one support if students need it. But yeah, that's a little bit about the type of work that we do, or to ensure that, we can support students applying for the California Dream Act.
Great, thank you, Virginia. And then we'll pass it over to Catherine to talk a little bit more about same question, what type of support, helpful resources, or any partnerships that has supported that.
Thanks so much, Madeline. So yeah, hi again, everybody. Name's Catherine Custodio. So I am a counselor in our financial aid and scholarships department at UC Berkeley. And I think our biggest thing that in general, our campus provides support is that we do have our Dream Center on campus, known as the Undocumented Student Program, or USP. So they provide various kinds of support to the students, including academic support. They've partnered with an organization for free legal support, as well as they provide some emergency funding, among other things. But the greatest thing that is we as our office have partnered with them. So I think someone else had mentioned previously that they are the financial aid liaison for their Dream Center. So same here, I am the liaison that I work specifically with our Dream Center and any Dream students that come up in terms of advising and any special cases. So that's kind of the biggest thing, that partnership there. But in our office in general, at UC Berkeley, another additional form of support that we do provide is we're very fortunate that we were able to provide some additional funding to our undocumented students outside of the funding that they could get through the California Dream Act. This was done with a resolution with our students that they were able to pass some funding. So our students are able to get what are referred to as basic needs awards. There are certain eligibility requirements, but in general, if a student can get that award, they can get funds equivalent to a CalFresh equivalent, knowing that our Dream students wouldn't be able to apply for CalFresh. We wanted to make sure that they do have that food support needed during their time here. So, there are just some things here and there that we're constantly trying to work on to see how we could best support these students, especially when the funding isn't always there, despite, the institutional aid we can try to provide. We try to really think of different ways that we can holistically support these students throughout their education here.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. So I think we'll throw it back again for Virginia to start. But as we heard earlier today with the introductions, right, there's lots of different folks here with different positions, different institutions, all excited, dedicated to helping folks navigate these new changes with the California Dream Act. I want to hear from you all how you're kind of preparing, how you, your organization, your campus are preparing for these changes, and both kind of like your staff and your colleagues are preparing, and how are you kind of like making sure the students that you all are serving are also aware and ready for these changes.
Yeah, I think how it is with most high school staff right now, our first semester, we really focus on college applications. So just really focused on making sure students apply by, the deadlines. And so now that students applied, we're focusing more on seeing how we're going to prepare for financial aid season next semester when students come back. So like to make sure that from the beginning of week 1, we're letting them know that, their applications have opened. So it's time for them to start applying. So something that we've been doing at my campus is really just all the different college access programs meeting together and making sure that we understand what we all do and how we can best support each other. So at my campus, I'm the coordinator for the Dream Center, right? So my focus would be undocumented students and making sure that they're represented throughout these different programs. So again, connecting with different college access programs, which, I think most schools have at least one or two, understanding what their curriculum is, what they plan on focusing on next semester when they're going to have certain presentations, and just really making sure that they're being inclusive, because I think it's really easy sometimes for folks to forget that there's another side to financial aid that's not just FAFSA. So yeah, just connecting with them and making sure that they understand that we have students on our campus that would also benefit from hearing this information. But yeah, just meeting with our counselors, meeting with college access programs, meeting with after school programs, just because they all have really good connections with their students. And so, if we can make those connections with them, then it's easier for us to bring in this information and they're more receptive to it. So yeah, I think that what we've really been doing for like the past 2 weeks at my school, just making sure we're prepared for when the new semester starts, laying out, what classrooms we're going to be visiting, making sure that we're visiting seniors, that, we let them know the counseling office is there, the Dream Center is there, and you have all these different resources. I think at the high school level, really what it's about creating opportunities for students to be able to fill out these applications, but also for them to even know that these applications exist, because, more often than not, I think we're still hearing a lot of students say that they didn't know that they could apply for financial aid. So just making sure that they know that it's an option, and just being inclusive when, when we meet with students and when we're speaking about financial aid, because I think if we're too FAFSA focused, then we kind of make it seem like, oh, it's not even an option for anybody else. So just being inclusive when we're speaking. So yeah, those are some of the folks that we've been meeting with. And I think another goal for next semester would be also speaking with our parents. I think at the high school level, that's the really unique thing, that we have a lot of parents who are willing to put in work and also support us. So, just speak with the parents, because they have amazing relationships with students and with teachers and obviously with other parents. So, they can help ease any anxieties that parents might be having about any changes that are happening. So I think that that's also a really good route to take, connect with your parents, and obviously all the other access programs at your school.
Great. Thank you, Virginia. Yeah, I think that's but a lot of really good points, right? Also echo with you. I'm hearing still constantly, even though the California Dream Act has been existing for 10 years at this point, there's still a lot of lack of awareness around it. Still a lot of stigma, unfortunately, right, in completing the application and what it means for your immigration status. And so I really want to uplift just making sure that everybody, all college access programs in your campus, not just the ones dedicated to serving undocumented students, are able to communicate and destigmatize and just increase awareness around the application is a really first step, and also involving parents, because that is, again, right, like one of the reasons why people are not applying, because they don't want to out their parents or want to put families in danger. And so how can it, again, be like a whole process to help increase those application rates? Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. Turning it over to Catherine. Yeah, how are you all preparing at your office, and how are you kind of like working at all with other offices to prepare for the changes and getting your students ready for these changes and the shorter financial aid time that we have?
Great. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I mean, just kind of like everyone here, I feel like a few with their words have shared, there's actually a lot that we still don't know, right, about the changes that are coming in. We have some theories in terms of what they're going to change, and hopes of what they're going to change kind of based on what they've shared. But until we actually see that application, receive the records, we don't know. However, our system or our campus has really tried to be proactive in anticipation of the changes that will be coming through. So one of the first things we have done is months back, we created a working group of the different units in our financial aid office, because we're broken up to like counseling, federal and state programs, scholarships. So our various programs in our financial aid office, we have a work group that's primarily focused on the changes occurring with the FAFSA and the California Dream Act. So in that work group, we do also have our business analysts, which if any of you here working for any colleges or universities, that's really a key connection. If you can make that, or make sure that the key players have that connection, because the business analysts are the ones who are going to be implementing those changes in our system. So they have a game plan on what they expect to do once those changes come in. Now, of course, that's dependent on when first the FAFSA changes come in, and then we start to get all the California DREAM Act records. But it's great that they have that game plan ahead of time, so that way they're not kind of just figuring it out as we're going along. Another thing one of our units has done that works particularly with CSAC is that they've been approached to do some beta testing for the application. Now, the testing hasn't occurred yet, so I can't unfortunately say, oh, yes, this is what it's going to look like and things like that. But I think the idea of what we're doing to try to be proactive about that testing when it does happen is we're compiling a list of kind of the current issues, right, that we're seeing and the changes that we're hoping to see with this new application, and making sure that when we do that beta testing, that we can actually see those implemented. So that's another thing too that we are trying to work on. And of course, just like I'm sure a lot of people here, we've been attending various webinars, various presentations, but also not just us. Like, I work with our Dream Center, so I'm also recommending that they attend, the DREAM Act changes, just because they are, first and foremost, the students' main point of contact before they even sometimes reach the financial aid office, just because the students might feel more comfortable contacting the Dream Center as opposed to going directly to financial aid, even with this liaison role that I've created there. So that's something I do want to also make sure that they are fully trained up too, so that way once I learn all this information, I'll share it with them and any other key partners, so that way these students can get that kind of what was mentioned with Virginia and Madeline, is everybody can share this information with the student. It's not necessarily just one, though I'm the liaison and I could definitely provide that information. I expect that all my colleagues in my office, and even these offices that do work with the DREAM students, can be at least aware of the general changes. I'm not expecting everyone to be a financial aid expert if they're not in the financial aid office, but just be aware of those general changes, so that way you can know how to best troubleshoot really common errors that might be now happening, right, with the new application. So those are just kind of a few things that we're doing. So it's all proactive. It's not anything, unfortunately, concrete yet until we get everything going. But hopefully these can be some tips that other people can take moving forward as well.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I like the highlighting of the proactiveness of it. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of unknowns, I think, that we'll have with the application that won't be really solved until it's actually out there in the world. But I think in the meantime, who are the people who deal with the California DREAM Act on your campus? Are you all kind of like working together to get ready for these changes, have that game plan, as Catherine mentioned, and also and just kind of how do we ensure that everybody is aware, because students don't often just go to one person. I think the Dream Center is oftentimes the place that they go to. So if there is no connection with that yet, if you're a financial aid officer, how can those kind of be formed already? And I think I'm curious too, this is not one of the questions I had planned for you all, but AB 540, right, is a very big part of the California DREAM Act. I think for our college folks, that means that admissions and registrar is a key player in financial aid for undocumented students to receive their aid. But I'm wondering, and I'll turn it over to whoever is able to answer this question, kind of like, how are you all preparing for this new change with the affidavit being included in the application, or if there's any like AB 540 support that you all kind of provide in your role also to make sure students are actually getting their aid.
I'll go ahead and share. Unfortunately, my current campus, it's very much our residency office is separated from the financial aid process. Not to say that they are not processing things, it's just that we don't have the communication like I've had in previous schools that I've worked in, where we work hand in hand to ensure, the processing of the AB 540 affidavit, just the communications that go out. So unfortunately, that's still something that we are working with to try to implement in the new year, trying to create those partnerships. But that is something I would recommend, is that if you are in a college or university, that you really try to make that partnership with the residency office happen, just because, now that they'll be getting that information in the application, in the opposed to the students submitting a separate application, just to see how that will affect their processing. Now, for some schools, it might not change too much, right? Because as was listed, they might still be requesting all this additional information from the students. But I think that would be that good question to ask if you have that partnership or want to create that partnership. And for anyone who's not in the college level, it might be good to see if there are any particular schools that you work with, right? You're like, a lot of our students go to this particular college. So maybe I could try to have that conversation with maybe not the residency office directly, right? But get in contact with a point person there, usually maybe the Dream Center or maybe even financial aid at one of those schools. So that's what I would kind of recommend as far as from the college perspective of it.
Thank you, Catherine. Virginia, anything you want to add around AB 540 and this new change also?
I think just highlighting what Catherine said about, obviously we work at the high school level and we work with youth. So I think just really being able to see what schools our students are going to and kind of walking them through that process. That's really it. I think on our end, that's kind of the goal. What we always try to do is just walk students through the process and support them as best as we can. And, we always tell them, like, even if we don't have any answers for you right now, we'll do our best to get you an answer or connect you with someone who does have an answer. So I think just maintaining that spirit of, we might not know, we might not have an answer right now, but just go through with it, walk them through it, and make sure that they do what they have to do to, have that best experience.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think as Catherine did mention, right, there are schools who may still want like additional documentation despite students providing the information on the application. And so I think communicating that with students too, right, that is a possibility depending on the school. If you're in the high school level or in the college level, like being clear about that process and communicating that with your applicants too. Is how to kind of best prepare for this change at the moment. And so thank you all for all that you shared with that. I do want to close this off with just one final question for our panelists, and that's just advice. We heard a range of emotions right around this new California Dream Act season. And so just want to open up to you all, like, what advice do you have for folks here or supporting those students on best kind of like navigating this new application and all the questions that may come up from it. I'll have maybe Catherine go first if she's ready.
Yes. So kind of, I feel like reiterating a couple of things I've said, create those partnerships, it's not too late to do so if you can. Like I said, at previous schools I worked at with the residency office, but, especially if you're at a four-year university, like residency in terms of grad and undergrad, because you want to make sure that you're also covering all those students. Or I think what was kind of mentioned earlier, one of the big things I can say is, if you are a key player or have the ability to connect with those key players about those internal deadlines that we talked about. One of the things I'm taking away from coming to this is, are we going to be making changes at Berkeley regarding the acceptance deadline just because of that shorter window? I know, was mentioned is the UCs in general, they are still promoting March 2nd as a priority deadline, but just given that the delay and everything, is there anything that can be changed? Or even maybe if it's something that big that can't be changed, maybe it can be something smaller. I know when I used to work at San Francisco State University, their internal funding, they used the Cal Grant deadline for their internal funding known as the state university grant. It's basically a tuition grant equivalent. And that was basically based on, their reports they were running, just making sure that they had enough funds available. But that's something that if you have the flexibility to do, can you extend that out now that the application has been extended out too, just to make sure there aren't those gaps where students suddenly don't qualify just because of a missed deadline. But really the last takeaway, and I always recommend this to anyone really trying to better understand how the California Dream Act works, is really just immerse yourself. It's great that CSAC has that line-by-line presentation. I'm going to be there. That is one of the ones that I'm so excited about. But at the end of the day, it's also just a presentation. I don't know if they're going to actually be doing a demo or anything like that. So what I'd recommend is, if you can for yourself, and I've done this in the past prior to the big changes to the CSAC login, But if you can create your own account and actually get into the California Dream Act, so that way you yourself can see, and maybe if you're not comfortable doing that, you're like, oh, I don't know if I can make my own account. If you have a student worker or maybe a student that you work closely with, and you could just kind of watch them, right, as they navigate the application, then that way you can really see that hands-on view to see, oh, if I click this and I go to the next page, it creates this error. That's the only way you find out those things, if you're actually in the application yourself. Because honestly, you can see a line by line, you can get notes that CSAC puts on their websites, but it doesn't necessarily give you that in-depth look. So that's kind of, I think, the biggest thing I'd recommend anyone here is just immerse yourself in the actual application once it becomes available. So that way you can really best navigate that to the students.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Right. The collaboration is really important, connecting with key actors. I think we heard that as one of the ways people are getting ready or like preparing themselves for this California Dream Act season is the importance of collaborations. And I really like the point of actually going in the application yourself. I filled out the California Dream Act when I was a student, but there's been so many changes. And so when I recently filled it back out, I think it gave me kind of like a new perspective on how students today are navigating the application, and how like we do our presentations and our resources. So I think that's also a really great kind of thing to uplift. And I see Nancy also mentioned that she applies to the California Dream Act every year herself too, to keep up with how that looks like on that end. Virginia, do you want to share your advice?
Yeah, I think just again reiterating what Catherine said about building those relationships with folks at your campus. There's a lot of people who really want to help, who are very interested in helping. And I think just making sure that they understand, you know, all this new information that we're obtaining as well. So sharing resources with them about any updates or any upcoming meetings, so you know they can also be better prepared. I think that's going to be really, really important because, you know, we want to help students and we don't want to do them a disservice by maybe providing them the wrong information. So just staying up to date, sharing resources, and making sure everybody who is, you know, partaking in this process of helping students apply is on the same page. And I think something else that I would say is probably just, you know, be very transparent with students as well. I think it's going to be a learning process for a lot of us, that there's going to be changes, and there's definitely nothing wrong with telling a student like, hey, like, I might not have the answer, or come back tomorrow, or we're gonna, you know, talk it out in our group and then we'll tell you how to go from here. Yeah, I think students definitely appreciate honesty, and I think there's nothing wrong, again, with, you know, being honest with them and letting them know that maybe you don't have all the answers, but that you will be able to help them get an answer, just reassuring them. I think that's also really, really important, because I know it can be very discouraging. I think especially for undocumented students, sometimes, you know, we feel like we have to go through all these extra hurdles. So just them knowing that you're going to walk them through that process and you're going to get them the help they need is really important. So yeah, just being honest, transparent, and sharing resources whenever available, I think will get everybody a really long way.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia. Yeah, I think the support, the kind of normalizing that support is available for undocumented students, and it's not something, it's not a bad thing, right, to be applying to the California Dream Act, is really helpful to hear at the college, I'm sorry, at the high school level, right, before students even get to this college and are kind of prepared for their journey. So thank you all for everything that you shared. I know we all are kind of in this together. We all are on the same level of understanding about what to expect with this application, but there is like plans, there's collaborations, there's like openness and flexibility with everybody on how to navigate these changes, and really appreciate all that you shared also with us. So I want to ask folks to kind of do like a virtual round of applause, however you want to do that, chat, emojis, hand things, to just thank our panelists for sharing all they did with us today. And Nancy also threw something in the chat. If you do want to learn about the Dream Resource Centers in your region, the Campaign for College Opportunity has this really great map that you may have seen already if you came to one of our presentations. It shows contact information actually for those offices. So something to maybe think about connecting and supporting students with this new version of the application. And so I will ask folks to actually hold their questions, any comments that they have. for now, so that we can actually move on to our breakout rooms. And the intention of these breakout rooms are for folks to kind of absorb, like reflect on some of the information that we all got from the presentation or for our panelists today, and kind of see, answer some of these questions that I'm going to throw up on the screen right now. These are also just suggestions if you want to kind of talk about something else related to the California Dream Act in your breakout groups. That's also perfectly fine. But kind of thinking about what's something new you learned today, what can you take back to your campus or organization, and what would you like to explore more beyond this meeting? So we will throw that in the chat if that's not already on the chat. And then we'll probably take about 8 minutes or so in our breakout groups. Nancy, are we ready to open that? Okay, so we'll open that right now and we'll see folks soon. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I think this is all of us. I hope everybody had a really good breakout group. Got to meet some really good people. And so, yeah, just kind of want to hear back from at least 2 groups on kind of what came up for you all, any new plans, next steps that folks are kind of maybe leaving the space with that they want to share with everybody. And feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I'm also open to calling on someone.
I can go. Daniela from CSUN. I think one of the things that we discussed in our group is, given that they're going to be embedding the residency AB 540 forms within the CADAA application, what that's going to mean specifically for CSUs, given that CSUs have a very standardized forms already. And what I think that's something that I want to take back to my campus and like connect with our A&R team, and just telling them, hey, like, we don't want students to duplicate this information, like filling out the forms twice. I understand, just kind of starting that conversation and how that's going to impact students. So yeah, I think that's the main thing that one of the points of discussion that we talked about, and also how I think the intent behind these changes is to make these applications easier, but we don't see that. We'll see how the actual impact is. But as of right now, it seems like it's going to create some barriers for our students, given the barriers that we already see our students facing when navigating higher ed as a whole.
Thank you, Daniela. Nancy, did you want to have a point?
Yeah, I think that this is a really important point, Daniela, and thank you for bringing it up. We're working right now on creating a resource to provide suggestions to schools about how they can really bridge that communication between admissions and financial aid. My understanding from the California Student Aid Commission is that there is going to be a separate report that financial aid could run, the Cal Grant coordinator could run, and then share with admissions. Or they also could work with admissions to be able to have access to the web grants for students, and then they could run that own report themselves. It is written into the law that the CCC and the CSU cannot require someone to turn in a new affidavit, but if they get lost in that ether between the departments, what are we to do then, right? So we're definitely thinking about how to build those. If you have good ideas or good workshop relationships, please let Madeline and I know so we can help share that out.
Yeah, I'm very curious to kind of see how the rollout of the embedding of the AB 540 affidavit actually works out for the different schools. So we'll most likely also kind of reach out back to folks to kind of hear about successes and challenges for some of those, as we also release that new resource that Nancy mentioned. Great, thank you, Daniela, for sharing that. I'd like to hear from maybe one more person from a different group to share. Anna?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So one of the things that we were talking towards the end was related to DSIG. So it's really great that now students will have the option to opt in to receive information, but some of the challenges I kind of expect to see with this new round of DSIG applicants is very similar to what first happened with College Corps rolled out, which is students. What I've noticed is that students don't apply to College Course because they don't know if they will qualify for DSIG. And now that the deadline has been extended, we see the potential of a delay for students to receive their awards. And I'm concerned because in the last couple of years, it's been a big challenge in trying to get students to apply to College Corps and feel confident that they're not wasting their time. And so I'd like to learn more about how can we address this gap that we're seeing, but also work together to increase the number of students who apply to College Corps, because on our campus, there's a lot of positions that left open and unfilled because students are just not applying.
Yeah, no, thank you for naming that too. I think we did kind of also see kind of like a lot of challenges just with the rollout with DSIG, with College Corps, even though they're like really great opportunities for students that didn't exist before that folks were like looking for. So I don't have an exact answer, I think, to the comment, but yeah, I think we also will kind of keep an eye out on how this like new like smaller window that we have for applying, the like extended deadline for the DREAM Act in general kind of also affects those pieces. We will be hosting a DSIG Promising Practice Roundtable in the new semester. So we'll incorporate maybe some of how these changes with the California DREAM Act kind of affected folks, but we have been seeing a lot of schools with pretty good promising practices to get folks to apply for DSIG specifically that I'm sure can be replicated in other campuses too. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I think that is all the time that we have for the share out, but I really do hope that folks got a chance to connect with other people from their school, maybe exchange some ideas, concerns, and this is just the first of many more California DREAM Act offerings that we'll be sharing with you all as these new changes kind of take place. Also wondering if maybe there's any final questions or things like that, comments for panelists that folks want to kind of throw out there, put it in the chat or say out loud. So even if we don't have time to kind of address it right now, that we'll kind of follow up with in the future. Okay, if not, we will be following up with everybody who registered with the recording, with the materials, with the contact information of everyone. So you all can reach back out to them, to us, if there are any additional questions or concerns that come out after you log off today. I'm just gonna close us out with a couple of final announcements. And let me make sure I just have this right window. Okay. And so just want to give a quick shout out for our next Promising Practice Roundtable. We're going to be picking it back up again in January. Next month, we'll actually have a specific session that's more geared towards community colleges because we want to talk about how to streamline the AB 540 process. Half of the California community colleges actually do not ask for additional documentation beyond the affidavit for their AB 540 students. In a process called self-certification. So we'll be talking a little bit more about this and how you can potentially get this implemented at your campus. Maybe this could also be a place for CSU UCs to also attend to see if there's any resonance or replicability between their own system, but this is a specific policy within the community colleges. So please register for that if you're interested in attending and learning more. And then finally, if you have not been getting our digest, please sign up for it by emailing me. This is a really great way to kind of keep up on our events, resources, many more California DREAM Act information that we'll be providing. And you can do that by, again, emailing me and make sure to just add me as your contact so it doesn't get caught in your spam filters because it is sent by MailChimp. And here is the information for all of our panelists today. This is just the beginning of this collaboration with you all, so please reach back out to them. Lots of appreciations to Catherine and Virginia for giving us a really amazing panel and sharing the great work that they do, and for Nancy for doing a lot of the background work and contributing to our presentation today. So we'll throw some of those emails in the chat, but really appreciate everybody who stayed until the very end. Have a good end of your year and happy holidays to those who celebrate, and we will see you in January. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Catherine.
Bye, Juliana. Good to see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Monica. Bye, Diego. Bye, Juliana.